Hi, today I am Budget Wonder Woman, and I'm going to use my lasso of truth to tell you the truth about Enchanters End Game by David Eddings. So, Enchanters End Game is the fifth book in the Belgariad series. It is the last book. I'm actually really glad that I'm done with this series. I'm first going to go over what happened in this book, then I'll talk about what I thought about it and what I thought about the Belgariad as a whole, and why I'm glad I'm just done with this series. So, of course, this book takes place right after the fourth one. At the end of Castle of Wizardry, they had just gotten, I believe, to Meloria? Or where had they gotten to? I can't actually remember where they had gotten to. I think they had gotten to Meloria. I don't actually remember. No, they hadn't gotten to Meloria. Okay, so Meloria is kind of a separate continent. It's where the evil god Tarak is asleep. And so that's where they're going to kill him. But anyway, so this starts out, they had just kind of run away from Polgara and the other people in Riva, and we're like, nah, it's just gonna be Garion, Belgarath, and this other guy named Silk. Like, there's three of us. We're just gonna go. Whatever. Y'all can deal with it. And at the same time, Sinedra and Polgara are gathering a huge army, basically to distract the bad people's army, so that Garion and the others don't have to deal with that. So this starts out with Garion's party. They're going through the northernmost part of this continent to get to the other one. And just stuff happens. I mean, they run into the king of the Nadrix. And so there's like 5 different bad people races. They were all created by Tarak. And the Murgos are the main one. They're like the main baddies. Then there's the Malorians, who are also a big threat, and who I think are going to be the threat of the sequel series. But then you have the Nadrix, and the king of the Nadrix is not really happy with the Malorians, because the Malorian king has come over and is having his army conscript everyone into the army, and the king of the Nadrix is not very happy about this. So he meets with Garion and Belgarath and Silk, and Silk is actually a prince, and you know this from like the beginning of the first book. And he's very closely related, of course, to the royal family of one of the countries, and their main thing they deal with is spying. So the king of the Nadrix is like, hey, can you like tell someone that I want to form an alliance? They don't say it in as many words, but it's like, I want to form an alliance because the Malorians are really bad and I don't like them. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is because it actually comes into play later. So they do that, and then they get to Meloria. And then for a good part of the book, I mean, because this happens in the first 100 pages, and then basically the middle chunk of the book into the last 100 pages deals with Sinedra and the big army that she has gathered, and them going into a couple of different battles and that sort of stuff. And they are essentially, they're trying to, one, cause a distraction, and also they're trying to get these ships through this area, I guess to cause more damage or destruction or to have a better position, because the evil people are threatening to invade the other nations. And so they wind up, they're able to get the ships where they need to go, but they didn't realize that both the Murgos and the Malorians were basically coming at them from both sides, and so they have no chance of escape. Sinedra, Polgara, Durnik, and a couple other people, they get captured. Durnik, I don't know if I've mentioned him. He's been around since the first book. He's a blacksmith who lived on the farm that Polgara and Garion lived on at the very, very beginning of the first book. So Durnik really, really likes Polgara, and that's kind of one of the main reasons he comes with them. Polgara tells him that they have to leave. You know, I'm so sorry, but we have to leave. And Durnik's like, hey, I'm coming with you. to protect you, because he doesn't realize that Polgara is a sorceress. He doesn't realize that she can take care of herself. And so he's been with them. He hasn't really done a whole lot. He's kind of the grunt. He builds the fires and that sort of stuff, and he's sort of the straight man when it's like, what is that? How does that work? He's not in it like a ton. He's not annoying about it. He's just in it. But anyway, so Dernick is one of the people that gets captured with Polgara and Sinedra. They are taken to the Malorian king, and he basically treats them like his guests. The reason is because the second prophecy, because we finally figure out more about the two prophecies, sort of. They're still not very specific about it, even in this book. But the second prophecy says that Polgara will be Tarak's bride. And so they're like, oh, well, you're going to be our god's bride, so we're going to be nice to you. We still got to capture you, but we're going to be nice to you. And now the rest of the army, they are trying to hold off as long as possible to get the boats through. And then the Nadric army actually comes and is able to open up an escape route for them because, like I was saying, Nadric King doesn't like the Malorians or the Murgos or anyone. He's like, no, I don't want Tarak to be revived because that's not good news. Because a lot of the evil people, they know that Tarak is their god, but they don't really like him because Tarak wants human sacrifices all the time. And so like, no, we don't really want that. So the Nadric King is now in alliance, and he helps save most of the good guys' armies, and then we're done with that. And so then the last part of the book is where everyone is coming together, and they're going to beat Tarak. It's very, very simple. And basically, Dernick is killed, which you would think would be really sad, because it's like, oh no, he's been here this whole time, whatever. Except that in I think the first book or the second book, they say that, they mention this a couple times, that he will die twice and he will live twice. They mention this a couple times, and I'm like, okay, so he's supposed to die and he's gonna come back. Like, it's not that sad. And everyone's acting all sad, like, oh no, they're all so sad. I'm like, but the prophecy said he's gonna come back. I don't know. Maybe they thought, oh no, maybe now the other prophecy is gonna come true, whatever. So he dies, and that's actually the turning point. So the part of the prophecy that was actually the determining factor of whether it would go one way or the other was if Polgara would submit to Tarak, because Tarak is God and he can make pretty much anybody do what he wants. You have to have an extraordinarily strong will to resist him. And Polgara even was saying earlier in this novel, and I think the one before, that she wasn't even sure that she would be strong enough to resist him. Well, Dernick's death gave her the strength to resist him. And so then eventually Garian's able to, kill Tarak, and it's like, woohoo, Tarak's dead. And then all the gods show up because they're like, oh, he's our brother, we have to mourn him and all that. And they ask, the good guys ask them, is there anything, can we bring Dernick back? And they're like, well, because Polgara loves him and wants to marry him and all that. And they say, well, we can't bring him back at, or if we bring him back and you guys get married, you guys aren't going to have an equal relationship because you are a sorceress. So we need to equal out the relationship because otherwise it's not going to work. And she's like, that's fine. I'll give up my sorcery. I just want to be with him, whatever. And so they tell Garian how to use the orb to revive Dernick. And he's revived, woohoo, yay. And so then the last part of the book, it kind of just wrapping everything up. It's supposed to be the day of Sinedra and Garian's wedding. It's also going to be the day that Dernick and Polgara get married. And they're talking about, Polgara's just getting used to, not being a sorceress. And she's like, yeah, I feel fine. I haven't tried to do anything with my sorcery because I know it's not there anymore. But, I think I'm fine. I'm ready to just be like a regular woman. I've been alive for like 5,000 years or something like that, and I'll be fine. Meanwhile, Dernick and Belgarath is Polgara's father. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Belgarath is Polgara's father. Dernick and Belgarath have been scheming for a while. And after Dernic and Polgara get married, Dernic gives Polgara a wedding present, and it's a steel rose. And Belgarad's like, wait a second, just wait. And Polgara's like, what's going on? And so Dernic turns the steel rose, into a real one, but because it's got the steel base, it'll look like a real rose, but it will never fade or wilt or anything. And she's like, wait, did you do that, Dad? And he's like, no. She's like, wait a minute. And so Polgara decides to try to use her magic, and she can use it. And she's like, but why did you let me think that I couldn't do my magic? He's like, I never said you couldn't do it. You just assumed. And so they made their relationship equal by making Dernic into a sorcerer. That's how that worked out. So that was a nice happy ending for them. And then Sinedra and Garion get married, and woohoo, it's happy. But they do say that no, it's nice and happy, but the orb is still around for some reason. You would think that if the universe was done with it, it would go away. It's like, well, apparently the universe is not done with it yet. And, oh, hey, the Lorians, they're not a threat right now, but you're going to have to deal with them soon. So that's kind of the little teaser they leave you with at the end, saying, oh, yeah, you're going to have to deal with them someday. And the next series is called The Malorian, so I imagine that's what they're dealing with. But, yeah, so that was what happened in Enchanters End Game. Again, there's more specifics that happen, but that's the basic plot. So when I started reading this book, I was just so ready for it to be over. The first part just kind of dragged, and I was like, we know Garion's gonna beat Tarak, whatever, just let us get there. Don't do all this stupid traveling, we don't care. And so I read the first part. Thankfully, the first part is only 100 pages. I'm like, oh my god. I had to sit there and force myself to read it. It wasn't bad, but it was like, okay, we get it. I know what's gonna happen. And then we got to the middle portion with the army, and a lot of that was also just sort of logistics and traveling, and then there was some of the battle. But I found that a lot more interesting, and I don't know why. I think it was just a lot more interesting to see what they were doing. There was a lot of different characters in there that we hadn't seen as much, and they're interacting. And so for some reason, that was a lot more interesting to me. And surprisingly, because Polgara and Sinedra and Dernic and all of them were captured, and then they were going to be in the same place as Garion and Belgarath and them. It was a little more interesting. The ending, I thought I was going to be super bored throughout the entire thing. I wasn't. I was a little annoyed with the whole, Dernic getting killed thing. So I was like, I know it's going to happen, and y'all are being so sad about it, and yet the prophecy says he's going to come back to life. Like, what's your problem? So that was a little annoying. But ultimately, I didn't have as much of a problem reading the rest of it. It was just the first part. There's 4 parts in here. And the first part was the problem. Like, I get it. They're setting some stuff up. But they also do things that these books, I'll talk about this in the whole series as a whole, but they have a lot of things happen that don't really matter. They're maybe little things that develop the world a little bit more, or develop the characters a little bit more, but not even that. And so they still had some in here, just kind of pad the book out. But yeah, so if you decide to read the series, you of course have to read this book. And I think it ends well. And I think if you can get past the first part, it's not so bad. This is like the second book. The second book, I also kind of had the same issue where the first part was kind of boring. It wasn't as boring because when you know how it's going to end, I mean, yeah, I looked at the last page, but even if I hadn't, I knew how it was going to end. It's a hero's journey story. You know how it's going to end. But yeah, so you definitely have to read this if you want to read the whole series. So I want to talk about the Belgariad as a whole. All of these books. It is, let's see, when was the last book published? 1984. Oh god, this is the first edition. 1984. This thing is older than I am. But anyway, so this whole series is 35 plus years old. So it definitely shows its age, because the fantasy genre has certainly evolved a lot more over the years. A lot more things have changed. The hero's journey is not as typical. They like to subvert that and change it so it's not quite so typical. This is like hero's journey, just Oh my god. And I don't even know, I don't know if they hit exactly the same beats as a hero, like the typical hero's journey, but it's the hero's journey. Like, it's, yeah. It's very, very typical. I've never really been surprised in this series. Nothing was really like, oh my gosh, what? Because he has a bad habit of telegraphing things way too much. Like, okay, so I'm the type of person, and spoilers for Game of Thrones if you haven't seen it or read it. I was the type of person who read the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire and knew automatically that Jon's parents were Lyanna and Rhaegar. I knew. I could read that. I could figure that out just from reading it. For somebody like that, reading these, it's like just in big bright neon letters going, "Hey, look at what's coming." And I don't know how much that was intentional or how much of it wasn't, but it was not. There were no surprises in these books like that at all. It's like, oh, and one of the things, at least with A Song of Ice and Fire, is that it's okay for the reader to know things because you're anticipating the characters learning these things. And there was a little tiny bit of that in here, but not to the same degree. Because the main thing was that Garion is the Revan king, and so you were waiting until he got to learn that, and he learned that in book 4. So I liked book 4. I was very much looking forward to it because of, like, I want to see how Garion reacts. That was interesting, but that was kind of the only thing that was like, ooh, I'm anticipating it, and there weren't really any other surprises. Like the whole Durnick thing, that could have had some real emotional weight. Well, for one, if they had more interactions with Durnick and Polgara. They did have interactions, but it wasn't their story, it was Garion's story. So you saw them, but it wasn't as big of a deal. But then also, he telegraphed it so hard that this guy was coming back. But whatever. Another issue I had with this series, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, was that he will put in a lot of fluff. A lot of things that do not actually matter to the story at all. Like, completely not at all. And it was just annoying to read because thinking, okay, this took up, 20 pages, 30 pages, however many pages it was. And going, you could have spent this time doing something else or just cut it down. And not every story has to have all this extra material. The books are long enough without it. I mean, they're not huge. They're not huge. They're 300 to 370, most of them. So they're not huge, but they still don't need that extra padding. Most of it sort of gave you another insight into the world a little bit, but not really so much into the characters, or definitely didn't aid in the plot in a lot of these. And I think, and I mentioned this in one of the previous videos about this series, is that he kind of came up with the series after making a map. And I mean, I used to do this when I was a kid. I'd make a map and then be like, ooh, I want to write a story based on it. But that's kind of what he did. He made a map and he made a story based around this map. And you kind of get the feeling that these side stories or little subplots, stuff, cul-de-sac things, are just so he can explain more about this world that he created in his head. One big thing you learn when you write and you have to do research or you do world building is that the reader is not actually going to see most of it. And some writers will still try to put that in and be like, hey, look, I did my research. Christina Dodd was really bad about that. I don't know if she still is, but she used to be really bad about that. I was like, let me put this in there. Hey, look, see, I did this. I made up this world. Take a look at it. And maybe back in the day it wasn't such a big thing to have that in there. Like, editors didn't care as much because it's fantasy, That was kind of the point back then. Longer exposition and talking about the world wasn't as big of a deal. But it was kind of frustrating as a modern reader reading that, going, all right, just get on with the plot. So I think, though, some of the good things, it's super easy to read. Like, I wouldn't call it, middle grade or young adult necessarily. I think that it's definitely readable by older middle school, high school age, definitely. But it's very easy to read. The language is not overly complicated or and it's not structured weird. I had no problem reading it, which was really good because sometimes you read some of these books. I had this issue with Jacqueline Carey with the Kushiel's Dart series. I got over it. I was finally able to kind of just like get into the rhythm of how she was writing. But she writes very like I don't know how to say it, but more upper level writing, like more fancy, I guess. And sort of probably also just because of the time period it's set in, like, it's more fancy. And I had a hard time getting into it when I first read it. It's like, oh, this is a little, okay, I have to use my brain a little bit more when I'm reading this. This wasn't like that. This was very easy to read. Oop, I hit my mic. This was very easy to read. And it was pretty quick. I mean, as much as I was kind of procrastinating reading some of these, once I sat down to read it, I could read 100 to 200 pages pretty quickly. So that wasn't a problem. And I think that younger people would enjoy this as an introduction to fantasy, or just some older school fantasy. And I think it'd be very appropriate. There is violence and like blood and that sort of stuff, but there's very like any of the sexual stuff is so like covered by innuendo, and there's not even that much of it that it's like they wouldn't even know. And no, like the only like sex that takes place is like the very like last page of the book. And it's super just heavily implied because Gary and Sinedra just got married. It's like you would not know unless, you're an adult and you know what they're talking about. So I'd actually say this might be a good series for, 8th grade and up, maybe, to get into for fantasy if they're not, they want something different. They want something exciting, but relatively clean. The violence is still, it's not, I wouldn't say it's any worse than what's on TV. It's definitely not like Game of Thrones or anything like that. It's just, sword fighting and all that. So yeah, this would probably be good for that. And if you kind of want to see what some older school fantasy is like, reading this is definitely a good experience. They wouldn't take you very long to read. They're definitely interesting. I don't know if I'd read these again, simply because I think once you've read them, you kind of know what's going on. I could see though, if you had read these when you were younger, a lot of the reviews of this were, oh hey, I read this when I was younger, and I went back and I read it again. Some people liked it again. Some people went, oh god, I forgot how like horrible this was. But I don't think it's terrible. I just think that it is a product of its time, and there wasn't as much stuff in the fantasy genre as there is now, and so the genre has changed. But definitely not a bad experience for reading a 35-plus-year-old series. So yeah, I would recommend this if you're looking for that type of experience. If you are trying to read something more modern, you're not gonna find that in here. There's like no sex in it, if that's what you're interested in, and the violence is fairly tame. There is violence, hell, Gary burns a guy alive at one point. But yeah, but there's violence, but it's very tame. So yeah, so that was my review of the Belgariad series, and of Enchanter's End Game. I'm finally done with this series. I'll be reading, The Greatest Lover in All England next. It's a romance novel by Christina Dodd. And you should check out my Twitter if you want to see the cover of this, or just wait for my review. The cover is why I bought this book. It looks ridiculous, and I'm looking forward to reading it. I don't know if I'll like it or not. It's one of her earlier novels, and her earlier novels have some problems, but that's okay. If I don't like it, I can just rant on here. It'll be great. But yeah, and I'll try to read. I don't have too many spooky books. I do have, though, a couple of Anne Rice's books that I haven't actually read. So I might read one of those and might read something else. Just so I have some spooky book reviews, because I want to do something Halloween related for the book reviews besides just, dressing up. But yeah, so look forward to those. You can go ahead and follow or check out hashtag 1 year of books and at author Emmy Kennedy on Twitter. So you can see what I am reading, random just stuff I post. Sometimes I post pictures of the animals. I posted a picture of the cover of The Greatest Lover in All England, and it's great. It's like a Fabio looking guy. It's great. But yeah, check that out if you want to just keep up on things on more day to day. I know I don't reply to people super often. I usually only go and check my comments like once or twice a week. So, because I get super obsessive, and I go, if I start to check it regularly, I'm going to check it all the time, and that's not healthy for me. So I try to check it only like a couple times a week so I don't go crazy, because I know I don't have that many subscribers, and that's okay, and I really appreciate the ones I have. And so I don't want to be sitting there, getting obsessed like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I apologize if I'm not getting back to people quick enough. I will get back to you as soon as I can. I usually check, like I said, a couple times a week. All right, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next week. Bye.